The black Toyota Camry pulled into the parking lot at exactly 7:30 p.m. Vin Diesel sat behind the wheel for a moment, watching the warm glow spilling from the windows of Family Table Restaurant. Cars filled nearly every spot in the lot, families, walking through the front doors with excited children tugging at their parents' hands. The sight made him smile despite the baseball cap pulled low over his eyes and the dark sunglasses hiding his famous face. 6 months ago, this building had been nothing but an empty shell with broken windows and graffiti-covered walls. The neighborhood had seen better days, but Vin knew the potential was there. He had grown up just 15 minutes away, understanding what this community needed. Not another fast food joint or fancy place with prices nobody could afford. They needed somewhere real families could come together over good food without breaking the bank. He stepped out of the car and pulled his jacket tighter. The evening air carried the smell of garlic bread and roasted chicken from the restaurant's kitchen. Through the large windows, he could see servers moving between tables, children's faces lighting up as plates of food arrived, elderly couples holding hands across small tables. This was exactly what he had pictured when he first walked through that empty building all those months ago. The decision to keep his ownership secret hadn't been easy. Every part of him wanted to be involved in the daily operations, to know the staff personally, to make sure everything ran the way he envisioned. But he also knew what happened when celebrities attached their names to businesses. The focus shifted from the food and the community to the fame. Customers came hoping for selfies instead of enjoying family dinners. Staff got nervous and acted differently. The whole atmosphere changed, so instead he had worked through lawyers and business managers, creating a structure where his involvement remained hidden. Only 2 people knew the truth: his accountant and the general manager he had personally selected after weeks of interviews. Even the staff believed the restaurant was owned by a silent investment group from out of state. Tonight was different, though. Tonight, he needed to see for himself how things really worked when nobody knew he was watching. The monthly reports looked good on paper, but numbers only told part of the story. He wanted to walk through the kitchen, observe the servers, maybe even sit at a table and eat the food his customers were paying for. The back entrance stood slightly ajar, just as he had arranged with the kitchen manager during a brief phone call earlier that day. He had introduced himself as a health inspector, doing a routine check, knowing the story would give him access without raising suspicions. The kitchen manager, a woman named Rosa who had worked in restaurants for 20 years, had sounded professional and confident on the phone. That was a good sign. Vin slipped through the back door and immediately felt the controlled chaos of a busy restaurant kitchen. The sounds hit him first: sizzling pans chopping knives against cutting boards, the steady hum of industrial refrigerators, and voices calling out orders. Steam rose from multiple stovetops where Rosa and 2 other cooks moved with practiced efficiency. The kitchen was spotless. Every surface gleamed under the bright lights, cutting boards were organized by color coding, and the staff wore clean uniforms with hair properly covered. Rosa noticed him immediately and walked over, wiping her hands on her apron. "You must be the inspector," she said with a warm smile. "Everything's ready for you to look around." Vin nodded, grateful that his fake story was working. "Just doing a routine check. Don't mind me, keep working like normal." As he watched the kitchen operation, pride swelled in his chest. The staff worked together like a well-oiled machine, calling out orders and updates to each other in both English and Spanish. Nobody rushed or seemed stressed despite the dinner rush being in full swing. The food coming off the line looked exactly like what he had tasted during the recipe development phase: generous portions of comfort food made with quality ingredients. One young cook, barely out of his teens, was carefully arranging garnishes on plates with the attention to detail of someone who truly cared about the final product. An older man worked the grill with the confidence that came from years of experience, flipping steaks and chicken breasts with perfect timing. This wasn't just a job for these people. They took pride in what they were doing. Moving toward the service area, Vin could see servers picking up orders and heading out to the dining room. The system seemed smooth, with tickets organized clearly and communication flowing well between kitchen and waitstaff. Through the pass-through window, he caught glimpses of the dining room. Full tables, people laughing, children drawing on the paper placemats with crayons the restaurant provided. The whole scene felt alive in a way that warmed his heart. This was why he had invested not just money but his dreams into this place. Growing up, his own family had struggled to find restaurants where they felt comfortable and welcome, places where the food was good, but the prices didn't require saving up. For weeks, he wanted to create that space for other families in this neighborhood. A server approached the kitchen window to pick up an order, and Vin recognized her immediately. Maria had stood out during the hiring process 6 months ago. She was studying to become a nurse while working to support her younger brother and their grandmother. During her interview, she had spoken passionately about the importance of treating customers like family, about making sure everyone who walked through the doors felt welcomed and valued. Watching her now, he could see that passion in action. She double-checked each plate before taking it to the table, made sure the silverware was properly arranged, and even grabbed extra napkins knowing that families with young children might need them. These were the small details that made the difference between a good restaurant and a great one. The evening was going perfectly. Better than he had hoped, actually. The staff was professional, the food looked amazing, and the atmosphere in the dining room buzzed with the kind of energy that meant customers were having genuine good times. All his careful planning and investment seemed to be paying off exactly as he had envisioned. But as he moved deeper into the restaurant, following a hallway that led toward the staff break room and office areas, something changed. The sounds of the busy kitchen faded behind him, replaced by a different sound that made him stop walking entirely. Someone was crying. The sound was coming from the staff break room, barely audible over the distant clatter of the kitchen. Vin moved closer, his footsteps silent on the carpeted hallway. The door stood slightly ajar, and through the gap he could see someone sitting at the small table where employees took their breaks between shifts. It was Maria, the same server he had just watched carefully arranging plates and treating every order with such attention to detail. Now she sat hunched over the table, her shoulders shaking as tears fell onto something in her hands. Her usually perfect ponytail had come loose, and strands of dark hair fell across her face as she tried to muffle her sobs. Vin's protective instincts kicked in immediately. During his years in Hollywood, he had learned to read people quickly, to sense when someone was genuinely in distress versus just having a bad day. This was real pain he was witnessing, the kind that came from devastating news or crushing disappointment. He stayed in the hallway, not wanting to intrude on her privacy, but unable to simply walk away. Through the crack in the door, he could see she was holding what looked like an official document. The restaurant's letterhead was visible at the top, and even from his limited angle, he could make out enough to realize what it was. A termination notice. The discovery hit him like a physical blow. Maria was being fired? The same employee he had just watched working with such care and professionalism. The woman who had impressed him so much during her interview that he had specifically asked the general manager to keep an eye on her progress? Nothing about this made sense. From what he had observed tonight, Maria was exactly the kind of employee every restaurant owner dreamed of having. She was thorough, professional, and genuinely cared about the customer's experience. During her interview, she had also mentioned never being late to anything, explaining that taking 2 buses to get to work meant she always left home early to account for any delays. Maria wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and tried to compose herself. But the tears kept coming. She kept reading the termination letter, as if hoping the words might change if she looked at them again. Her hands trembled as she held the paper, and Vin could see the defeat in her entire posture. The document appeared to list several violations: chronic lateness, poor customer service, and failure to follow restaurant protocols. But none of that matched what Vin had just witnessed with his own eyes. If anything, Maria seemed to go above and beyond the basic requirements of her job. A terrible suspicion began forming in his mind. Something was very wrong here, and he needed to find out what was really happening. But first, he needed to talk to the person he had trusted to run this restaurant, David Chen, the general manager. Vin had hired David after an extensive interview process. The man had 15 years of restaurant management experience, excellent references, and had presented detailed plans for building a positive workplace culture. During their meetings, David had spoken eloquently about treating employees fairly, and creating an environment where good workers could thrive and advance. Now, seeing one of his best employees crying over a termination notice, Vin wondered if he had misjudged David entirely. He made his way toward the manager's office, his mind racing with questions. The office door was closed, but light spilled out from underneath. He knocked firmly, and David's voice called out for him to enter. David looked up from his computer with surprise when Vin walked in. For a moment, the manager seemed confused, clearly trying to place the face of someone he wasn't expecting to see. Then recognition dawned, followed immediately by what looked like panic. "Mr. Diesel," David stammered, jumping to his feet. "I wasn't expecting you. Nobody told me you were coming tonight." "That was the point," Vin replied, closing the door behind him. His voice carried an edge that made David take a step backward. "I wanted to see how things really work around here." David's face had gone pale, and he kept glancing toward his computer screen as if trying to hide something. "Everything's going great," he said quickly. "Numbers are strong, customers seem happy, staff is performing well." "Really?" Vin asked, settling into the chair across from David's desk. "Because I just saw one of your servers crying in the break room over a termination notice. Maria, I think her name is. Want to explain that to me?" The color drained completely from David's face. He sat back down heavily and started shuffling papers on his desk, avoiding eye contact. "Maria has been having some performance issues," he said, his voice lacking conviction. "Chronic lateness mainly. Some customer complaints too." Vin leaned forward. "What kind of lateness are we talking about?" David pulled out a file folder and spread several documents across his desk. They appeared to be attendance records showing multiple instances where Maria had clocked in late over the past month. The pattern was consistent, arriving anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes after her scheduled start time. "See?" David said, pointing to the records. "It's been an ongoing problem. I've talked to her about it several times, but nothing seems to help. Sometimes you just have to make the hard decision." But something felt off about the whole explanation. Vin had spent years learning to read people in high-pressure situations, and David's body language screamed deception. The manager kept fidgeting with his pen, wouldn't maintain eye contact, and seemed nervous in a way that went beyond just being surprised by an unexpected visit from the owner. "What about customer complaints?" Vin asked. "You mentioned those too." David fumbled through more papers. "Well, there haven't been any formal written complaints," he admitted, "but I've noticed some issues when I've been watching the dining room." That answer made even less sense. From what Vin had observed tonight, Maria's customer service had been impeccable. She was attentive without being intrusive, efficient without seeming rushed, and genuinely friendly in her interactions. "David," Vin said slowly, "I want to see the security footage from the past few weeks. Specifically, I want to look at the employee entrance during Maria's shift start times." The request hit David like a physical blow. His face went from pale to almost gray, and the pen he had been fidgeting with fell from his fingers. "The security footage? I'm not sure we really need to go that far. The attendance records clearly show." "Show me the footage," Vin interrupted, his voice carrying the kind of authority that had commanded movie sets for decades. "Now." David's hands shook slightly as he turned to his computer and began pulling up the security system. The restaurant had cameras at all entrances, in the kitchen, and throughout the dining area. Vin had insisted on a comprehensive system, both for security and to help identify any operational issues. As the footage loaded, Vin noticed David seemed to be stalling, clicking through menus more slowly than necessary. Finally, he pulled up the employee entrance camera for the previous week and selected one of the days when Maria was supposedly late. What they saw on the screen made Vin's blood boil. The timestamp showed 4:30 p.m., exactly 30 minutes before. Maria's shift was scheduled to begin. The back door opened and Maria walked in, checking her phone to confirm the time. She hung up her jacket, tied her hair back, and headed toward the staff area to clock in. According to the footage, she was early, not late. "Play another day," Vin demanded, his voice dangerously quiet. David reluctantly pulled up footage from 3 days earlier. Again, Maria arrived early, this time 25 minutes before her shift. The pattern continued as they checked day after day. In every instance, Maria arrived well before her scheduled start time, often spending the extra minutes helping with setup or reviewing the daily specials. The attendance records David had shown him were completely fabricated. "You want to explain this to me?" Vin asked, though his tone made it clear this wasn't really a question. David's composure finally cracked completely. His hands began shaking visibly, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "I can explain," he said quickly. "There's been some kind of mistake with the computer system. The timestamps must be wrong, or maybe—" "Cut the lies," Vin interrupted. "The security footage doesn't lie, and neither do timestamps on digital recordings. You've been falsifying attendance records. The question is why?" The office fell silent except for the hum of the computer and the distant sounds of the restaurant operating beyond the closed door. David stared at his desk, his breathing shallow and rapid. Finally, he looked up with the expression of someone who knew their world was about to collapse. "I can explain everything," he whispered. David's confession began slowly, like water starting to leak from a cracked dam. At first, he tried to minimize what he had done, calling it minor adjustments and necessary business decisions. But as Vin pressed for details, the full scope of David's betrayal began to emerge. "It started small," David said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just little things here and there. The restaurant was doing well, but I was having some personal financial problems. My ex-wife, the divorce settlement, legal fees. I was drowning." Vinny listened without interrupting, his anger building with each word. The man he had trusted to run his dream restaurant had been systematically stealing from both the business and the employees. "I figured out that if I adjusted the payroll records, I could pocket the difference," David continued. "Not from everyone, just from employees who worked a lot of hours. A few minutes here and there, nothing anyone would notice. But the scheme had grown larger over time." David explained how he had started targeting specific employees, particularly those who seemed vulnerable or unlikely to fight back. Maria had become his latest target because she was young, working multiple responsibilities, and seemed to trust the management completely. "The termination letters are the final step," David admitted, his hands shaking as he spoke. "I fire the employee for cause, which means they don't qualify for unemployment benefits. Then I hire someone new, usually a friend or family member who's willing to share part of their paycheck with me." The systematic nature of the fraud made Vin's stomach turn. This wasn't a desperate person making one bad decision. This was calculated theft that targeted the most vulnerable workers, people who depended on their paychecks to survive. "How many people have you done this to?" Vin demanded. David pulled out another file folder, this one containing termination records for the past 4 months. 7 employees had been fired for various violations: chronic lateness, poor performance, policy violations. Looking at the names, Vin recognized several from the original hiring process. These had been good people, workers he had been specifically interested in helping succeed. "What about their references?" Vin asked. "When these people apply for other jobs, what kind of recommendations do they get?" David's silence provided the answer. Not only had he stolen money from these employees, but he had also destroyed their ability to find other work by creating false performance records that would follow them to future employers. The human cost of David's actions became clearer with each detail. These weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. These were real people with families, bills, and dreams. Maria was studying to become a nurse while supporting her grandmother and younger brother. One of the other terminated employees had been a single father trying to save money for his daughter's college education. "Where's the money now?" Vin asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Gone," David said simply. "Gambling debts, mostly. Some went to keeping up with alimony payments, but most of it went to the casino. I kept thinking I could win it back, pay everything back before anyone noticed." The classic addiction story, but that didn't make Vin feel any less furious. David had chosen to solve his gambling problem by stealing from people who could least afford it. The betrayal felt personal, not just because Vin owned the restaurant, but because he had specifically created this business to help working families in the community. "How much total?" Vin pressed. David pulled up a spreadsheet on his computer, scrolling through columns of numbers that represented stolen wages and fraudulent terminations. About $42,000 over the past 4 months, he said quietly. The amount was staggering. Not just in dollars, but in human impact. $42,000 represented thousands of hours of work that people had performed but never been paid for. It represented rent payments, grocery bills, medical expenses, and educational costs that families had struggled to cover while believing they were earning money they would never see. But beyond the immediate financial theft, David had also been systematically destroying the restaurant's culture. The employees who remained had no idea their co-workers were being fired based on lies, but they could sense the tension and uncertainty. The positive workplace environment Vin had wanted to create was being poisoned from within. The security footage, Vin said suddenly. You have access to edit or delete it, don't you? David nodded miserably. I've been deleting certain segments, changing timestamps where I could, but the system automatically backs up to an external server, so there are copies I couldn't touch. That explained how David had been able to maintain his fraud for so long. By controlling both the written records and the security footage, he had created a false reality where hard-working employees appeared to be problem workers deserving termination. What about Maria specifically? Vin asked. Why target her now? She was starting to ask questions, David admitted. Last week, she noticed that the schedule had been changed after she clocked out, making it look like she had missed a shift she actually worked. She came to me about it, said the computer must have made an error. Maria's attention to detail and honest nature had made her a threat to David's scheme. Rather than being rewarded for her integrity, she was being punished with false accusations and termination. The full picture was becoming clear, and Vin felt sick thinking about how many warning signs he had missed. The monthly reports had looked good because David had been manipulating the numbers. The staff turnover had seemed normal for a restaurant because the terminations appeared justified on paper. The new hires had seemed enthusiastic because they were David's friends and family members, people who had reason to be grateful for the jobs. There's something else, David said hesitantly. Some of the new employees I've hired, they're not exactly qualified. My nephew in the kitchen, he's never worked in food service before. My ex-wife's brother is working as a server, but he's been drinking on the job. Even the quality of service was being compromised. David hadn't just been stealing money. He had been gradually destroying everything Vin had worked to build. The professional kitchen staff was being replaced with unqualified friends. The experienced servers were being fired and replaced with people who didn't understand proper service standards. Why are you telling me all this now? Vin asked. You could have tried to cover it up, blame the computer system, something. David looked up with the hollow expression of someone who had finally reached the end of their rope. Because I know it's over, he said. I've been waiting for this moment for weeks, knowing eventually someone would figure it out. Maybe part of me wanted to get caught. The confession session had lasted nearly an hour, and Vin could hear the restaurant operations continuing beyond the office door. Customers were still enjoying their meals, families were still creating memories, and the honest employees were still working hard to provide good service. None of them knew that the foundation of their workplace had been built on lies and theft. But now Vin knew the truth, and he had to decide what to do with it. The legal implications were serious. David had committed multiple felonies: embezzlement, fraud, identity theft. The restaurant's reputation could be damaged if the story became public. The remaining employees would lose their jobs if the business couldn't recover from the financial losses. Most importantly, there were still victims who deserved justice. Maria was sitting in the break room right now, crying over a termination notice based on complete lies. The other fired employees were probably struggling to find new jobs, carrying false performance records that made them look like unreliable workers. David, Vin said finally, you're done here, immediately. I want your keys, your passwords, and your access cards. Security will escort you out. What about the police? David asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. That's coming next, Vin replied. But first I need to fix what you've broken, starting with Maria. As David gathered his personal belongings with shaking hands, Vin was already planning his next moves. The immediate priority was stopping Maria's termination and explaining the truth to her. Then he would need to contact the other wrongfully terminated employees and make things right. The financial losses would have to be calculated and recovered somehow. The unqualified new hires would need to be replaced with properly trained staff. But underneath all the practical concerns was a deeper question. How could he rebuild the trust and culture that David had systematically destroyed? The employees, who remained, had been working in an environment where good performance could apparently lead to sudden termination for false reasons. How long would it take to convince them that honesty and hard work would actually be rewarded? The dream of creating a place where families could gather and employees could thrive wasn't dead, but it would take time and effort to resurrect it from the damage David had caused. After escorting David from the building and securing his access to all restaurant systems, Vin stood in the hallway outside the manager's office, taking a moment to process everything that had just been revealed. The sounds of the dinner service continued around him, servers calling out orders, the kitchen maintaining its steady rhythm, customers laughing in the dining room. The restaurant was still functioning, but now he knew it was built on a foundation of lies and theft. His first priority was Maria. She was still in the break room, probably trying to figure out how she was going to pay her bills or continue her nursing studies without this job. The injustice of her situation made his anger burn hotter, but he forced himself to remain calm. She had been through enough trauma tonight without having to deal with his emotions too. Vin knocked gently on the break room door before entering. Maria looked up from the table where she had been sitting, her eyes red from crying, but her posture straightening automatically when she saw someone in the doorway. Even in her distress, her professional instincts kicked in. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, wiping her face with a napkin. "I know I should be working. I just needed a minute to—" "You don't need to apologize," Vin interrupted gently. "And you don't need to go back to work tonight. We need to talk." Maria's expression shifted to confusion as she tried to place who this man was. He wasn't wearing the usual restaurant uniform, and she didn't recognize him as a customer or vendor. "Are you from corporate?" she asked hesitantly. "Something like that," Vin replied, pulling out the chair across from her. "Maria, I'm Vin Diesel. I own this restaurant." The revelation hit her like a physical shock. Her eyes widened and she looked around the room as if expecting cameras or some indication this was an elaborate prank. "But the owner is supposed to be some investment group. Nobody ever said—" "I kept my involvement private intentionally," Vin explained. "I wanted this place to succeed on its own merits, not because of my name. But tonight I came to check on how things were really running, and what I found made me sick." He gestured to the termination letter still clutched in her hands. "That document is based on complete lies. David Chen has been stealing from this restaurant and from the employees for months. The attendance records he used to justify firing you were completely fabricated." Maria stared at him in disbelief. "But the computer records showed I was late, all those times. He had printouts with my employee number and everything." "Computer records can be altered by someone with administrative access," Vin said. "I just watched the security footage from every day you were supposedly late. In every single case, you arrived early, not late. You've been one of our most reliable employees." The information seemed too much for Maria to process at once. She kept looking down at the termination letter, then back at Vin, as if trying to reconcile two completely different versions of reality. "I don't understand," she said slowly. "Why would he do this to me? I always tried to do good work. I never complained about my schedule or asked for special treatment." "That's exactly why he targeted you," Vin explained. "You were honest and hard-working, which made you a threat to his scheme. When you started noticing discrepancies in the schedule, he knew you might figure out what he was doing." Over the next 20 minutes, Vin explained everything David had confessed: the systematic wage theft, the falsified performance records, the pattern of firing good employees and replacing them with unqualified friends and relatives. With each detail, Maria's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to anger. "How many other people did this happen to?" she asked. 7 others over the past 4 months, Vin replied. All good employees who deserved better. Maria was quiet for a long moment, processing the magnitude of what she was learning. Those people probably think they actually did something wrong, she said finally. They're out there looking for new jobs, thinking they're bad employees because of lies. Her concern for the other victims, even while dealing with her own trauma, reinforced Vin's conviction that Maria was exactly the kind of person he wanted working at his restaurant. That's something we're going to fix, he assured her. I'm contacting everyone who was wrongfully terminated. They'll get their jobs back if they want them, plus compensation for the wages that were stolen. What about David? Maria asked. I've already called the police. What he did was criminal fraud and embezzlement. He'll face the legal consequences. Maria nodded, but Vin could see she was still struggling to accept that her nightmare was over. Months of being told she was failing at her job, weeks of stress about keeping up with her school and family responsibilities, and now the shock of learning it had all been based on lies. It would take time to process all of that. Maria, Vin said, leaning forward slightly, I need to ask you something important. After everything that's happened, would you be willing to stay and help me rebuild this place? She looked surprised by the question. You mean just go back to serving tables? No, Vin replied. I mean take over as general manager. The suggestion clearly caught her completely off guard. But I'm just a server. I'm still in nursing school. I don't have management experience. You have something more important than experience, Vin said. You have integrity. You notice when things don't add up, and you speak up about problems instead of ignoring them. You care about doing the job right, and you treat customers and co-workers with respect. He gestured toward the door, beyond which the restaurant continued its evening operations. David had 15 years of management experience and impressive references. Look how that turned out. I'd rather work with someone I can trust than someone with a perfect resume. Maria was quiet for several minutes, considering the offer. What would that mean exactly? Being general manager? It means overseeing daily operations, managing staff schedules, maintaining quality standards, and making sure employees are treated fairly, Vin explained. It also means a substantial salary increase and the authority to make decisions about hiring and firing. I wouldn't know where to start, Maria admitted. You'd learn, Vin said. I'll work closely with you for the first few months, and we'll bring in consultants to help with the business management aspects. But the most important part, creating a workplace where good people want to work. That's something you already understand. As Maria considered the offer, Vin found himself hoping she would accept. Not just because he needed a trustworthy manager, but because her story represented everything he had wanted to achieve with this restaurant. She was working hard to build a better life for herself and her family, pursuing education while supporting relatives who depended on her, the kind of person who deserved opportunities, not exploitation. Can I think about it? She asked finally. Of course, Vin replied. But there's one thing that can't wait. Tomorrow morning, we're calling a staff meeting to explain what happened and make some immediate changes. I want everyone to know that the culture of fear and uncertainty is over. Maria nodded. What should I tell people tonight? The other servers are going to notice that David left suddenly. Tell them the truth, Vin said. David was caught stealing from the restaurant and the employees. He's been fired and won't be coming back. Tomorrow we'll have more details about how we're going to move forward. As their conversation continued, Vin could see Maria gradually accepting that her situation had completely changed. The relief on her face was evident, but so was the determination to make sure something like this never happened again. There's one more thing, she said. Some of the newer employees, the ones David hired recently, they might not be the right fit for this place. Vin smiled grimly. David told me about his nephew in the kitchen and his ex-wife's brother serving tables. We'll be making some staffing changes very soon. The evening had started with Vin expecting to observe a smoothly running restaurant. Instead, he had uncovered a criminal conspiracy that had been destroying his business from within. But sitting across from Maria, seeing her strength and integrity even after everything she had been put through, he felt hopeful about the future. The restaurant could be rebuilt. The culture could be restored. The employees could learn to trust management again. It would take time and effort, but it was possible, and Maria would be essential to making it happen. The next morning arrived, gray and cloudy, matching the somber mood that had settled over Family Table Restaurant. Vin arrived early, before any of the staff, to prepare for what would be one of the most difficult conversations of his business career. The dining room that had buzzed with happy families just 12 hours earlier now sat empty and quiet, the chairs still stacked on tables from the previous night's closing routine. Maria had agreed to come in early as well, accepting his offer to become the new general manager. She sat across from him at one of the large tables, reviewing the list of employees they needed to contact. The wrongfully terminated workers would be called first before the staff meeting, so they could choose whether to return or pursue other opportunities. "I keep thinking about Roberto," Maria said, looking down at the list. He was saving money for his daughter's quinceañera. When David fired him for supposedly stealing food, Roberto was devastated. He kept saying he had never taken anything that wasn't offered to him. Vin made a note next to Roberto's name. David admitted that was fabricated too. Roberto had been eating leftover bread rolls during his break, which is actually allowed under our employee meal policy. David wrote him up for theft to create a paper trail for termination. The systematic cruelty of David's actions became more apparent with each case they reviewed. Anna, a single mother who had been fired for poor customer service, despite consistently receiving positive comment cards from guests. Miguel, a dishwasher, who had been terminated for attendance issues when he had actually been arriving early to help with prep work. Each termination had been carefully crafted to seem justified, while targeting the restaurant's most vulnerable and honest employees. By 10 a.m., Maria had reached all 7 of the wrongfully terminated employees. 5 wanted their jobs back immediately. 1 had already found other employment but appreciated knowing the truth about what had happened. The 7th, Roberto, broke down crying on the phone when Maria explained that he had never done anything wrong. "He'll be here this afternoon," Maria told Vin after hanging up. His daughter's party is next month and he was worried he wouldn't be able to afford it anymore. The staff meeting was scheduled for 11 a.m. before the lunch prep began. Vin had decided to reveal his ownership of the restaurant during this meeting, knowing that transparency would be essential for rebuilding trust. As employees began arriving, he could see the anxiety on their faces. Unexpected staff meetings usually meant bad news in the restaurant industry. Rosa, the kitchen manager, was among the first to arrive. She had been with the restaurant since opening and had maintained high standards despite David's interference. "People are nervous," she told Vin quietly. "Nobody understands why David left so suddenly yesterday." "They'll understand soon enough," Vin replied. When the full staff had assembled, 12 employees including servers, cooks, dishwashers, and support staff, Vin stood at the front of the dining room. Some of the faces were familiar from his hiring involvement 6 months earlier, though most still didn't recognize him without his usual movie appearances. "I know you're all wondering about yesterday's events," he began. "David Chen was terminated immediately after we discovered he had been stealing from the restaurant and from all of you." The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Several employees looked shocked, while others seemed to be processing information that suddenly made sense of recent confusing events. "Before I explain the details," Vin continued, "I need to tell you something else. I'm Vin Diesel and I'm the owner of this restaurant." The revelation created a moment of complete silence, followed by gasps and whispered conversations as employees processed this unexpected information. Vin waited for the initial surprise to settle before continuing. "I kept my ownership private because I wanted this place to succeed based on the quality of food and service, not because of my name. But the situation we're dealing with now requires complete honesty." Over the next 30 minutes, Vin explained the scope of David's fraud. He detailed the falsified attendance records, the stolen wages, the fabricated performance issues, and the systematic targeting of honest employees. As the full picture emerged, anger replaced confusion on many faces. "How much money are we talking about?" asked Carlos, one of the senior cooks. "Approximately $42,000 over 4 months," Vin replied. But that number only includes what David stole directly. It doesn't account for the wages that terminated employees should have continued earning. Rosa raised her hand. What about the security cameras? Couldn't you see what was really happening? David had administrative access to the security system, Vin explained. He was deleting footage and changing timestamps to support his false records. But the system automatically backs up to an external server, which is how we caught him. Maria stood up to address her co-workers. Many of them looked surprised to see her there, since word of her termination had spread among the staff the previous day. I want you all to know, she said, that Mr. Diesel has asked me to become the new general manager. I know some of you might think I'm not qualified, and honestly, I have a lot to learn. But I promise that under my management, no employee will ever be lied about or stolen from again. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Maria was well liked among her co-workers, and her promotion sent a clear message about the kind of employees who would be valued going forward. What happens to the people David hired? Asked Jennifer, one of the servers. Some of them are his relatives. That's going to be handled case by case, Vin replied. Anyone who's qualified and honest can stay. Anyone who isn't qualified or has been violating policies will be replaced. This led to an uncomfortable but necessary conversation about David's nephew Tony, who had been working in the kitchen despite having no food service experience. Several employees mentioned incidents of him creating dangerous situations by not following proper food safety procedures. Tony will be terminated today, Vin said firmly. Food safety isn't negotiable. The meeting continued with practical discussions about immediate changes. Employee meal policies would be clearly posted to prevent any confusion. A suggestion box would be installed so workers could report concerns anonymously. Most importantly, Vin provided his direct phone number and email address, encouraging employees to contact him if they ever witnessed or suspected dishonest management practices. One more thing, Vin said as the meeting concluded. Everyone who was employed here during David's fraud will receive a bonus in their next paycheck. It's not enough to compensate for what you've been put through, but it's a start. As employees returned to their prep work for the lunch service, Vin and Maria remained in the dining room to discuss the day's remaining tasks. The atmosphere felt different already, lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from everyone's shoulders. The hardest part might be behind us, Maria observed. People seemed relieved to finally understand what was happening. But Vin knew the real work was just beginning. Rebuilding trust would take time. Establishing new systems to prevent future fraud would require ongoing effort. Most importantly, they needed to prove that the restaurant's stated values weren't just words on paper. Over the following weeks, those values were put to the test repeatedly. When Rosa's mother became seriously ill, Vin personally arranged for her to take paid leave to provide care. When Carlos mentioned struggling with his English reading skills, Maria organized tutoring sessions to help him advance to a supervisory role. When Roberto's daughter's quinceañera approached, the entire restaurant staff contributed to making it a special celebration. The changes weren't just internal. Word spread through the neighborhood about the restaurant's commitment to its employees, and customer satisfaction increased noticeably. Families began choosing Family Table not just for the food, but because they knew their money was supporting a business that treated workers fairly. 3 months after David's termination, Maria had grown into her role as general manager with remarkable skill. She had completed a restaurant management certification program and was successfully balancing her nursing studies with her new responsibilities. The staff respected her leadership, and the restaurant's financial performance had improved significantly. You know what the best part is? Maria told Vin during one of their weekly review meetings. People actually want to work here now. We haven't had any turnover since you took over, and we have a waiting list of people who want to apply. Vin smiled, thinking back to his original vision for the restaurant, a place where families could gather over good food, where employees could build careers instead of just getting by, where the community could find something positive to support. It had taken a crisis to get there, but they had finally achieved what he had dreamed of from the beginning. The story of David's fraud and the restaurant's recovery had attracted some media attention, but Vin had kept his responses focused on the employees and the community rather than himself. This wasn't about a celebrity saving a business. It was about ordinary people doing extraordinary work when given the opportunity and support they deserved. As the evening dinner service began on this particular night, Vin stood in the kitchen doorway watching the same smooth operation he had observed during his secret visit months earlier. The difference was that now the efficiency came from genuine teamwork and mutual respect rather than fear and uncertainty. Rosa called out an order with a smile. Carlos plated dishes with the pride of someone who knew his work was valued. The servers moved through the dining room with the confidence that came from knowing they were supported by honest management. And in the manager's office, Maria reviewed the day's numbers with the careful attention to detail that had once made her a target for David's schemes, but now made her an exceptional leader. The restaurant that had been built on lies had become a place built on truth. The employees who had been exploited were now empowered. The community gathering place that Vin had envisioned was finally, truly real. Sometimes the most devastating setbacks really do lead to the most meaningful victories.